Yes, please. Awesome. Thank you, sir. Okay, so what we want to talk about now is why we are in this country a two-party system. So what I mean is, like, when you look at other countries like France or Israel or Russia or country, well, maybe not so Russia, but used to be. I don't even understand Russia anymore, so we're not going to talk about them. But when you talk about like these other countries that have multiple viable parties, yes, we have lots of third parties in our country, but are they viable for election? Not for national election, typically. And so we want to try to understand. A lot of it has to do with election laws. So these are some of the major reasons, and I'm going to draw you some diagrams to explain them. So if you just want to kind of look at them, and then we'll talk through. Part of the reason we're a two-party system is because we've always been a two-party system. And I know that that sounds really lame, but we just kind of started that way. What were the origins of our first two parties? Perfect. From day one, even though we don't have parties written into our Constitution, they might as well be, because from our ratification debate, we ended up with those two parties. Then we have this thing about political socialization. Because what is the number one factor that socializes us? Remind me? Your family. So we have this tradition of being socialized either about Republicans or about Democrats. Those have been our two parties since the 1800s. Now, they're not the same. The parties have undergone, they are dynamic, they change their positions, they change their perspectives, all of those things, but those have been the two parties that we've had since the 1800s. Winner-take-all plurality elections. We learned about that last unit. That had to do with the Electoral College. Remember, we said that whoever gets the most of the popular vote gets all of the electors, and thus it marginalizes third parties when they run for office. Does that come back to you? It was like a week ago. Okay. We also have another election law concept called single-member districts, and I'm going to draw you a picture in a second to explain that. But that has to do with how we elect people to the legislature. The last bullet has to do with in our state elections and our local elections, we make it crazy hard for third-party candidates to get their name on the ballot. So it was quite a few years ago. You guys were a little bitty back then, but there was a man that ran for governor in Texas. His name was Kinky Friedman, and I'm not making it up. Okay? Yeah, he was such a character. So he wanted to run for governor, but he was an independent, so he wasn't Republican, he wasn't Democrat. So in order to get his name on the ballot for governor, he had to have 50,000 registered voters sign before they would even put his name on the ballot, before they put him in debates or anything like that. That's a lot of people to get to sign a piece of paper, and to validate that they're registered voters and that sort of thing. We just don't make it easy. We don't question and make the Republican and Democrat do that because it's based on the primary or based on the caucus, and it's just kind of those are the established parties. But if somebody is independent or they're a member of like the Socialist Party or the Libertarian, we just put more constraints on them. And I think probably because we want to make sure they're legit, that they're not. Kinky Friedman, like we had to make sure that they're a legitimate candidate. But anyway, let me show you how single-member districts works. Single-member districts have to do with how we organize our legislature. Okay. All right, so let's pretend that this is our state, our completely square state. Okay, it's nice, isn't it? Within every state, you take your state and it's broken up into legislative districts. So like Texas has 36 of those, like all over. And some of them are really small because there's a whole lot of people that live there. Geographically, some of them are really big because there's very few people that live there. But they're supposed to have about the same number of people in every district. And then in November, we will have elections for each district. Okay? So when those of us that get to vote in November, we're going to go, and for House of Representatives, District 3, we're going to have a Republican, Sam Johnson. We're going to have a Democrat, I don't know, he won't win. So here we go. And then we will most assuredly have a Libertarian candidate that runs because they're a prominent third party. Okay? Just like with presidential elections, we simply want to know who gets the plurality of the vote in that district. So Johnson, let's say he's been there for years, but let's just say he doesn't have a great year and he only gets 45%. And the Democrat only gets 25%, and the Libertarian gets 30%. Okay? Just like with our Electoral College laws, the Republican wins. and now they will represent that geographic area in the legislature. We have 435 of those in this country that are like that. I promise you that third parties are getting percentages of the vote. But because they don't have the media attention, they don't have the money, because of straight party voting or straight ticket voting, what we have is we have third parties get marginalized again. Okay? I'm going to show you the opposite way of doing that so that you understand. We don't do that in America, but I think it will make more sense if you see another way of doing it. Okay? So, let's pretend that we have a proportional system. Okay? And in the proportional system, let's say that for this area, we have 10 legislative seats in this whole little country, state, city, whatever. Okay? And we're going to have elections, and let's say that we have a blue party and a purple party and a red party and a green party and a turquoise party. Okay. So those are like the parties that end up getting a certain percentage of the vote. Okay? And let's say that the blue party gets like 20% and they get blah, 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 blah. What they do is a proportional legislature takes those 10 seats and breaks them up proportionately over what percentage of the vote they got. They usually have a threshold. They'll say like, okay, you have to get at least 5%. I'm not saying this is 100% true, but to my knowledge, the only countries I know that have multiple parties in their legislature and like multiple viable parties, they do their legislature like this. Or they use a hybrid system. Maybe part of it is organized based on region, and then part of it is based on proportion. Okay, so they still have to have somebody that, like, they still tend to have like dominant parties, but you see more of that. Like some European countries do it like this. Okay, so what kind of system would that be? Say it louder with enthusiasm. That is not enthusiastic. Proportional. Okay, this kind of system is a single member district. Okay, here's a common mistake that people make. Winner take all is for the Electoral College, it's for the presidency. Single member districts is the legislature, so it has to do with like Congress. It's the same concept. But if I asked you for two laws that marginalize third parties, that's two laws, even though it does the same thing, because one is about the election and one is about Congress and one is about the presidency. All right, I got to show you one more thing to make sure that this makes sense, okay? All right, let's pretend that this is our political spectrum in our country, right? So we've got over here, is this the more liberal party or the more conservative on the left? Liberal. Okay, so we've got the more liberal parties over here, and then we've got the more conservative party over here. Okay, so let's pretend that you have a country that is like this viable, like third party, like they have different kinds of election laws. And so this, say 20% is the Communist Party, and they get 20%. And let's say that the socialists end up with, say, 35% of the vote. And let's pretend that the moderates get 25%, and the old-fashions. I don't know. I'm just making this up. Okay? So that the old-fashioned party, what have I got left? 55, 60, 80. So they get the remaining 20%. Okay? So then fast forward. So we've had an election, and this is what your legislature looks like. So 20% of the seats are held by them, 35% are held by them, 25% and 20%. So that's the makeup of your legislature. How are you ever going to accomplish anything without a majority of the legislature? If people vote based on party, how are you ever going to get anything done? Whitney, if that's your situation and you're a moderate and you've been elected here and you really want to accomplish something, what are you going to try to do? That makes sense to me, right? Because you're going to be more like-minded with these people than these people potentially, or certainly than these people, right? They're going to have nothing to do with each other. So we call that, where groups come together and they agree to work with one another, we call that a coalition, and that is a word you need to know. Okay? We don't have the same kind of coalition building in our country because that's the Democratic Party and that's the Republican Party. Don't we have conservative Republicans and more moderate Republicans? And we have, liberal Democrats, more moderate Democrats? And we talk about our parties and how they're so factionalized. So we could eliminate that by becoming a multi-party system. But then once you have an election, you have to form coalitions to dominate and get anything done. So in practicality, it can look very, very similar. I think the difference is that if you're super liberal and you really want to vote for a communist, you don't have to be ashamed in a country like that, because it's like out there, right? Like there's a legit option for you. So there are more options as voters, but then when it comes to government, if these people can't work together, it's over. Okay. All right, that is the absolute perfect place to stop.